The ice storm arrived without warning. One moment the sky above the frozen moon was dull and quiet, and the next it screamed like something alive. Wind slammed into the old weather station, shaking its metal walls. Snow hit the windows so hard it sounded like stones. Inside, Calder Voss worked in silence. He was a human veteran who had chosen the cold edge of space to disappear. His hair was gray, his face lined by years of war and loss. The station was old, patched together with spare parts and stubborn care. It was enough. Enough heat. Enough food. Enough quiet. Calder tightened a bolt on a heater panel when the lights flickered. He paused. His hand stayed still. The flicker happened again. "Don't you start," he muttered to the station, his voice rough from lack of use. He stood and checked the control screen. Power was stable. Shields were holding. The storm was bad but not deadly. Not yet. Then he heard it. A sound slipped through the wind. Oh, long broken. Calder froze. It was not the wind. He knew wind. He had listened to it for years on this moon. The sound had pain in it. It had need. A howl. Calder's heart began to beat faster. No life signs showed on his sensors. The moon was listed as empty. No native creatures. No visitors. No reason for a howl. The sound came again, closer this time. Calder moved slowly to the window. He wiped frost from the glass with his sleeve and leaned forward. At first he saw nothing but white. Then shapes began to form. Dark shapes, low to the ground, moving against the storm with effort. They stumbled. One fell and struggled to rise. 5 of them. They looked like wolves but not from Earth. Their bodies were longer, their legs stronger. Frost clung to their dark fur. Their eyes glowed faintly, not wild but aware. They stopped a few meters from the station. They did not attack. They did not run. They lowered their heads. Calder stepped back as if struck. His mind raced through old training, old warnings. Unknown species. Unknown danger. Lock down. Do not engage. His hand hovered near the emergency shutter control. Then one of the wolves collapsed. Another let out a weak sound, nothing like a threat. It was thin. Almost quiet. Calder cursed under his breath. He checked the scanner again, adjusting it manually. Life signs appeared, faint but real. Intelligent patterns. Not animals. Not simple. Alien. And dying. The storm grew louder. The temperature dropped another degree. Calder closed his eyes for a moment. He saw old faces. Old orders. Doors that stayed shut while people begged on the other side. He opened his eyes and made a choice. The outer gate groaned as it slid open. Ice rushed in, sharp and biting. Calder pulled his coat tighter and stepped forward. The wolves lifted their heads. Their eyes locked onto him. No fear. Only focus. "Easy," Calder said, not knowing why. "I'm not here to hurt you." The words fogged in the air. He backed toward the open gate and waved his arm once. Inside. "Hurry." For a long second nothing happened. Then the largest wolf stepped forward. Its movements were slow and careful, as if every step hurt. It crossed the threshold and collapsed just inside the station. The others followed. Calder slammed the gate shut. Warm air rushed back. The storm was cut away, replaced by silence broken only by soft breathing. The wolves lay on the floor, sides rising and falling. Frost melted from their fur, forming dark patches beneath them. Calder stood there, heart pounding, staring at creatures the galaxy had forgotten. He moved slowly, keeping his hands where they could see them. He grabbed emergency blankets and spread them over their bodies. One of the wolves flinched, then relaxed. Their eyes followed him. "You understand me, don't you?" Calder said quietly. The smallest wolf shifted closer to the others. Its ears twitched. Calder went to the med locker. His hands worked on memory alone. He treated burns, frost damage, shallow cuts. Nothing violent. Nothing recent. These wounds were from travel, from survival, not battle. As he worked, a strange pressure filled his head. Images flashed behind his eyes. Ice cities under blue skies. Long roads across frozen plains. Wolves standing beside tall beings, guarding, watching. Then fire. Ships in the sky. Running. Lost. Calder staggered and caught himself on the table. The largest wolf lifted its head and met his eyes. The pressure eased. Calder swallowed hard. "You're not animals," he whispered. The wolf's gaze was steady. Proud even in pain. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, but inside the station was warm and quiet. The wolves slept in a tight group. Calder sat nearby, rifle untouched against the wall. He did not sleep. He watched the door. Old habits. At some point, the smallest wolf crawled closer and rested its head on his boot. Calder stiffened, then slowly relaxed. Nixon, he said without thinking. The name felt right. The storm finally began to fade. Morning light crept through the frost-covered windows. Calder stood and looked at the 5 wolves resting in his shelter. He did not know who they were. He did not know who would come looking for them. But for the first time in many years, the silence around him did not feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something he could not yet name. The storm outside had turned the ice moon into a white wall. Inside the station, warmth spread slowly from the heaters Calder had patched together. The wolves were still weak, their breathing slow but steady. Calder moved carefully among them, not wanting to startle creatures so unlike anything he had ever seen. He carried trays of warm water and nutrient paste he had stored for emergencies. The largest wolf, Relk, opened one glowing eye and sniffed at the tray. It made a soft, almost thoughtful sound, then lowered its head and drank carefully. Calder watched, studying every movement. These were not animals. Their gestures had intention, a quiet intelligence. The second wolf, Sivrin, was smaller and leaner, with a slight curve in its spine. It limped on a back leg. Calder knelt beside it, applying a simple bandage over frostbitten pads. Sivrin did not pull away. It even tilted its head as if examining his technique, then let him finish. Calder worked methodically. Torik, the third wolf, had a cut across its shoulder, probably from jagged ice. He applied a soothing gel and wrapped it. The fourth, Mela, was too weak to sit up, so he draped a blanket around her. The smallest, Nixon, still rested against his boot, watching him with wide, luminous eyes. "Don't worry," Calder said softly. "I won't let anything happen to you here." It was strange to speak to them like this. He had spent years giving orders in battle, commanding troops who sometimes followed out of fear. These creatures followed without force. They trusted him. Night fell again, and the station lights cast long shadows across the icy floor. Calder moved through the room, checking each wolf's vitals. He kept a careful log in his old notebook: heart rates, breathing patterns, small injuries. Keeping notes helped him focus. It reminded him that he could still make a difference. Hours passed. Calder built small nests with blankets for each wolf. Relk lay near the heater, Torik curled beside him, Sivrin and Mela shared a spot on the floor. Nixon shifted occasionally but mostly stayed close to Calder. By the next morning, the wolves had begun to regain energy. Relk tried to rise fully for the first time, swaying but steadying himself with a paw on the floor. Sivrin stood, stretching slowly. Even Mela lifted her head and sniffed the warm air. Calder allowed himself a small smile. They were survivors like him. They were learning that this human steel walls could be a safe place, even in the middle of endless ice. As he prepared breakfast, Calder thought about the moonside patrols from his old military days. He remembered how intelligence and careful planning had always mattered. Here he had no allies but the wolves themselves, and now they were beginning to show him their own strength. He named each wolf properly so he could track them. The largest was Relk. Strong, steady, cautious. The second, lean and watchful, became Sivrin. Torik was brave but stubborn, often trying to move faster than his body allowed. Mela was gentle, careful, and thoughtful. Nixon, the smallest, was curious, quick to notice small movements, and seemed to absorb everything around her. They adapted to the station quickly. They did not touch controls, but they moved as if they understood the layout. They avoided traps and stayed out of the heater vents. Calder realized they were learning from him while he learned from them. By midweek, the wolves were strong enough to patrol small parts of the station on their own. Calder would follow discreetly, watching their behavior. They communicated silently with glances, posture, and quiet sounds. He began to notice patterns. When one wolf was uneasy, the others responded immediately. When one found food or warmth, the pack shifted together. They were a single entity, connected in ways he had never seen in humans. Calder began experimenting. He set small challenges for them. A simple path with obstacles, food placed in slightly hidden spots. The wolves solved them with surprising intelligence, sometimes faster than he expected. They adapted, learned from mistakes, and then improved. Calder nodded quietly. He was witnessing more than survival, he was witnessing growth. Late one evening, as he repaired the station's outer generator, Calder felt a change in the air. The wolves were not just following him now, they were alert. They sensed something. A faint vibration, a subtle sound beneath the ice. He froze and looked at the group. Relk's ears twitched. Sivrin's stance stiffened. Torik and Mela pressed closer together. Nixon's gaze fixed on a point outside the wall. Calder's veteran instincts kicked in. "Easy," he whispered. "I'll check it out." He approached the window. Beyond the metal barrier, he He could just make out a shimmer in the ice, a light that pulsed faintly under the snow. It was not natural. Not from the sun. Not from the storm. The wolves remained calm but attentive. Calder's mind raced. Could it be another life form? Patrol? A scout? He could not tell. He made a note to investigate further in daylight. The night passed slowly, the pack huddled together. Calder sat on the floor, Nixon resting its head on his knee. He wondered how far they had come in only a few days. He thought about the universe, about war and isolation, about trust and loyalty. He realized something surprising. He did not feel lonely. Not like he had before. These wolves had become more than companions. They were teachers of patience, intelligence, and survival. They had given him a reason to watch, to care, to act. Morning came with pale light. Calder looked around the station. The wolves were awake, stretching, sniffing, exploring small spaces. He felt a strange pride. They had survived the storm. They had survived the ice. And under his roof, under human steel, they were safe. But he knew this peace might not last. Something had arrived or was coming. The shimmer under the ice, the silent awareness of the wolves, it told him the universe had not forgotten them. Calder tightened the straps on his utility belt, checked the scanners, and looked at his new companions. "We'll see it together," he said quietly. The wolves looked back as if they understood every word. And for the first time, Calder believed that together they might face whatever came next. Calder woke to an unusual hum in the station. The kind of sound that crawls under your skin before you even recognize it. At first he thought it was the storm, but the storm had ended days ago. The hum came from the old communication console, the one he had never powered in years. He approached carefully. The screen flickered to life, displaying a pulsing signal. His veteran instincts tensed. This was no normal transmission. The frequency was old, almost forgotten, used in conflicts long erased from official records. The signal carried a pattern. A repeated pulse that matched something he had never expected to hear again, the Krynith survival code, a distress signal supposedly destroyed generations ago. Calder's stomach tightened. Someone or something had found the wolf's trail. He turned to look at Relk, who was standing near the heater. The wolf's glowing eyes reflected the same alertness Calder felt. Sivrin and Torek stirred, ears angled toward the console. Even Mela lifted her head, and Nixon rose from the floor, tail flicking nervously. Calder ran his hand over his face. He had hoped their existence would remain hidden. The Krynith had survived countless hunts, evading an empire that wanted them erased. If the signal had reached anyone, the hunters could follow it here. He activated the station's sensors. Outside, the ice was silent, untouched by machines or ships. Yet, the universe was vast, but signals could travel fast, faster than frostbite or blizzards. Calder sat and studied the console. The transmission included data packets he could barely understand at first glance. Coordinates, timestamps, and fragments of Krynith memory embedded as biocodes. The memories flickered on the screen like faint holograms. Frozen cities, great crystal spires, wolves standing in ranks, defending travelers. Then fire. Smoke. Silence. The wolves shifted behind him. He realized they were aware, even if they could not speak the language. Their minds reacted to the danger in unison. Calder's heart sank. They were not just fragile survivors. They were targets, hunted not for war, but for refusing to serve an empire that demanded obedience. He thought quickly. The station had defenses, old ones from his days in the fleet. Not enough to fight a fleet, but enough to delay them. He began running checks. Shield generators, energy relays, heat camouflage, even the emergency laser turrets he had kept dismantled for safety. Every system he repaired reminded him of past battles, of missions he had long abandoned. "Calder," Relk murmured, or at least the sound from his throat suggested intention. Calder froze. Wolves did not speak human words, but he had learned to sense them. Relk was signaling awareness, a kind of consent. They understood more than he had imagined. He decided. They could run, but the wolves had nowhere to go. The storm-swept ice was their only cover. They could hide for days, maybe weeks, but the signal would attract persistent hunters. There was only one option: prepare to defend. Calder moved through the station like a veteran again, precise and measured. He recalibrated the external shields, making them appear inactive from space. He rerouted power to motion sensors and automated barricades. Every step was mirrored by the wolves. Nixon darted between relays, curious yet careful. Sivrin and Torek positioned themselves at the windows, their bodies tense. Mela stayed close to the power console, alert but calm. By evening, Calder paused. Outside, the ice shimmered faintly in the low sun. The station looked abandoned, lifeless from a distance. Yet within, it hummed with hidden energy, a small fortress held together by human ingenuity and alien instinct. He checked the console again. The signal was repeating, stronger now. Someone was actively searching, following the Crinith trail. Calder understood the stakes. These were not explorers or scientists, they were enforcers. They had the authority and the tools to destroy anything that defied the Empire's rules. He knelt beside Nixon, letting the small wolf nuzzle against his hand. "We'll face it together," he whispered. He didn't know how, but he knew the wolves' unity would be their strength. Humans alone had power in weapons and planning. Wolves had power in instinct, strategy, and bond. Together they could become more than either species alone. Hours passed. Calder studied the memory fragments the signal carried. The Crinith had been guardians of travel routes, protectors of trade and peace. They refused to serve as soldiers, refused to become tools of destruction. That refusal had made them fugitives. Now the last survivors had found shelter under human steel, and that shelter might be the only thing keeping them alive. A thought struck Calder. He could not just hide. If the hunters arrived, the wolves would be cornered. But if he broadcast the truth, the memories, the history, the betrayal, they might hesitate. The galaxy had ears. If enough people knew the Crinith were not enemies, perhaps the hunters could be stopped without a fight. He worked late into the night. He crafted a transmission, a carefully encrypted signal blending Crinith memory and human verification. The wolves watched as he typed, sometimes leaning in, their glowing eyes reflecting the dim light. It was not perfect, but it carried honesty, proof that the Crinith were survivors, not threats. Finally, Calder leaned back. The signal was ready to broadcast. Beyond the icy surface, he could feel the weight of the universe pressing closer. Something was coming. He turned to the wolves. Relk met his gaze steadily, Sivrin shifted alertly, Torek bristled, Mela's eyes were calm, and Nixon's head tilted as if understanding everything he had done. They were ready together. Calder exhaled slowly. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together. Not as hunter and prey, but as humans and Crinith. Allies." The station hummed softly, holding its secret against the ice. The signal pulsed once more. Somewhere, far across the stars, someone had received it. The universe had noticed. And now, Calder and the wolves were no longer alone. The horizon glowed faintly, a pale light reflecting off the ice. Calder stood by the main window of the station, watching the distant shimmer that had haunted him for days. The hum of approaching ships vibrated through the ground. The hunters were coming. He could feel it in the vibrations, in the careful, alert movements of the wolves around him. Relk paced near the heater, ears angled toward the window. Sivrin and Torek crouched at observation points, ready to react. Mela sat quietly by Calder, her gaze fixed outside. Nixon nudged his boot gently, offering a small comfort in the tense air. Calder had prepared as best he could. Shields were powered, traps were hidden, and the station appeared abandoned from space. But he knew the hunters would not be fooled for long. They were skilled, relentless, and used to getting what they wanted. Then the first ship appeared, a sleek, dark silhouette against the ice. It hovered silently, scanning the area. Calder tapped the console, watching the sensors flare. The ship's systems were sophisticated, more advanced than anything he had faced in his old military days. But he was not afraid, not entirely. He pressed a button to activate a hidden transmitter. A small pulse sent a stream of encrypted data directly to the hunter fleet, broadcasting the Crinith memories he had gathered. Crystal cities, peaceful gatherings, the wolves protecting travelers rather than attacking. The transmission was short but clear. The wolves responded immediately. Relk stepped forward, his posture straight and commanding. Sivrin mirrored him. Torek and Mela flanked the sides, and Nixon stood alert, tail high. It was as if they were ready to face the fleet not as prey, but as witnesses of their own story. The lead ship paused. A projection appeared in the sky above the ice, a holographic representation of the Crinith memories. The hunters saw what Calder had sent, proof that these creatures had been betrayed, hunted unfairly, and had survived without harming anyone. Inside the projection, the hunter's sensors could pick up details of the wolves' intelligence, their coordination, their loyalty. Each wolf's eyes glowed softly in the memory images, showing courage and wisdom. For the first time, the hunters hesitated. Calder watched carefully. He had learned to read hesitation in enemy ranks. It was dangerous, yes, but it also meant they were considering another option. He stayed calm, keeping the station powered and the shields active. Then the fleet transmitted a question, identification. Calder stepped forward and spoke into the microphone. His voice was steady, practiced from years of commanding troops. "This is Calder Voss. You are looking at the last survivors of the Kryneth. They are not enemies. They are peaceful, intelligent, and betrayed by your own empire generations ago. If you attack, you will be judged, not them. Witness their story before you act." Silence followed. The only sounds were the whirring of the shields and the low hum of the approaching ships. Calder turned to the wolves. Their eyes met his, unafraid. They had endured centuries of fear. They would not panic now. The holographic memories played again. Hunters aboard the ships adjusted sensors, scanning, analyzing. Their eyes could not deny what they saw. The wolves were not animals. They were strategists, guardians, survivors. They had reason, emotion, and history. Slowly, the lead ship lowered its weapons. Other ships hesitated behind it. Orders that should have been absolute faltered. The hologram showed undeniable truth. Attacking the wolves would be unjust, unnecessary, and dishonorable. Calder felt a shift. Years of war had taught him that some victories were earned not with weapons, but with understanding. The hunters were beginning to witness, not to destroy. The wolves responded subtly, moving in unison but without aggression. Relk's posture remained strong. Sivrin adjusted stance, Torek shifted slightly forward, and Mela's calm presence seemed to radiate through the station. Nixon's small body pressed closer to Calder's side, but her eyes never wavered. Time seemed to stretch. The wind outside slowed as if holding its breath. Then, one by one, the ships powered down weapon systems. Lights that could blind or burn faded. The hunters were no longer a threat. They were witnesses. Calder allowed himself a small smile. He had not fought a battle. He had shown truth. He had proven that the Kryneth were not enemies but survivors, and that humanity could choose compassion over fear. The lead ship transmitted again. This time, a message of acknowledgement, not command. They had seen the truth. They would not act against the wolves. The fleet would withdraw. Orders would be rewritten. Histories would be reconsidered. Calder exhaled slowly. The tension in his shoulders eased. He turned to the wolves. They were calm, some lying down, some observing. None were exhausted, yet all seemed aware of the weight of what had just passed. Relk approached Calder, pressing his large head against Calder's chest. Sivrin nuzzled the other side, Torek circled once and sat, Mela stayed quiet, and Nixon climbed gently onto Calder's knee. Outside, the ice moon gleamed under the pale sun. The fleet's shadows faded, leaving only the calm surface. Calder looked at the distant horizon, knowing that the galaxy had witnessed the Kryneth for the first time in centuries. For Calder, the victory was quiet but profound. He had taken a human action, compassion, courage, and reason, and changed the outcome of centuries of fear. The wolves were safe, at least for now, not because of force but because of truth. In the following hours, Calder walked among the wolves. He checked the station, repaired minor systems, and shared quiet moments with each creature. He realized they were no longer just his responsibility, they were allies, equals, and teachers. The Kryneth, who had survived centuries of betrayal, had found shelter under human steel. But now they had something more. Recognition. Witnesses to their story. Proof that the galaxy could see beyond fear and prejudice. Calder settled near the heater with Nixon on his lap, watching the others patrol small areas of the station. A quiet pride filled him. They had not only survived, they had been seen, understood, and respected. And somewhere in the distant stars, the hunters carried a new understanding. The Kryneth were not prey. They were not threats. They were witnesses to their own history, and now so was the galaxy. The station hummed softly, a small fortress of warmth and life in a cold world. Calder looked around at the wolves, his companions, his allies. Together they had faced the hunters not with weapons but with truth. And for the first time in many years, Calder Voss felt that perhaps the universe had noticed humanity for more than its war machines. It had noticed humanity for its choices, its courage, and its capacity for understanding. The ice moon was still cold. The horizon still vast and lonely. But inside the station, warmth remained, a small family of humans and Kryneth, standing together against the emptiness of space. Months passed on the ice moon. Calder had long stopped counting days, but he noticed the change in the station, in the wolves, and in himself. The storms were fewer now, the wind softer, and the pale light stretched longer across the ice. Life had settled into a rhythm, one that felt alive and purposeful. The Kryneth had grown stronger. Relk moved with confident grace, guarding the station while also exploring small areas beyond the perimeter. Sivrin was quick and precise, alert to every movement of snow or shadow. Torek, once clumsy and impatient, now walked with measured steps, his body and mind in perfect sync. Mela had blossomed into a careful observer, noticing things Calder often missed. And Nixon, the smallest, was endlessly curious, learning everything about the station and its human. Calder had become more than their caretaker. He was their bridge to the human world, their protector and their friend. They learned from him and he learned from them. Together they had built a small ecosystem inside the station. Food stored and shared, tasks divided among the pack, routines established. The wolves' intelligence was remarkable, but their loyalty and instinctive teamwork were even more extraordinary. One day, a human research vessel arrived at the moon. Calder had sent a quiet beacon informing nearby colonies of their presence, not as a request for help, but to signal discovery. The crew hovered over the ice, scanning, cautious yet curious. Calder stepped outside to meet them. The Krynith followed, a silent, disciplined line behind him. The humans froze at the sight. Wolves of immense size, glowing eyes and sleek forms, standing patiently, ready but calm. Calder smiled slightly. "They are not threats," he said. "They are survivors. Watch carefully before judging." The researchers did not shoot. They did not panic. They watched. And then they began to understand. Sensors confirmed what Calder had always known. The wolves were intelligent, coordinated, and capable of complex reasoning. They had learned to adapt, to communicate, and to trust a human entirely. Calder guided the researchers into the station. Relk stepped aside, Sivrin and Torek flanking calmly, Mela observing quietly, Nixon keeping close to Calder. The human visitors began to record, to document, to ask questions. They probed for danger, expecting it. They found none. Only order, intelligence, and a bond that went beyond species. Calder realized the significance. The Krynith, once thought extinct or dangerous, were now visible to the wider galaxy. They had been hunted for centuries because no one understood them. Now they were not only surviving, they were teaching. Teaching humans about loyalty, strategy, patience, and trust. Months of careful observation and interaction turned into cooperation. The researchers stayed for days, learning routines, cataloging behaviors, and understanding the intricate relationships within the pack. Calder Station became a neutral zone, a place of study, but also a place of respect. The Krynith did not become lab specimens. They became collaborators, their intelligence and instincts acknowledged, their presence valued. Calder spent his time quietly. He repaired sections of the station, maintained systems, and occasionally guided the wolves in new tasks. They explored small tunnels under the ice, marking paths, testing sensors, and teaching Calder methods of survival he had never known. He laughed quietly when Nixon tried to replicate a human tool, pawing at levers and buttons with bright eyes full of curiosity. Winter gave way to a long, pale spring. Ice melted slowly, revealing rocks and frozen rivers beneath. The wolves ventured further, guided by Calder's experience and their own instincts. They hunted not for food alone, but for knowledge of the land, understanding it in ways humans could never. Calder watched and learned, amazed at how these creatures, once feared, now thrived in harmony with him. One evening, as the pale sun dipped low, Calder and the wolves stood outside the station. The sky glowed pink and blue, reflecting off the ice. He counted 5 heads, 5 sets of eyes, all alert yet calm. They did not need his commands. They had grown, adapted, and integrated into his routines and world. Calder felt a deep sense of peace. He had left war behind, seeking isolation, yet found connection. The Krynith were no longer prey. They were allies, teachers, and companions. The station was no longer just a shelter. It was a home. Word of their existence spread quietly through the galaxy. Other humans arrived, bringing supplies, curiosity, and respect. No armies came. No hunters. The Krynith were no longer hunted, they were seen. Their story had changed. The galaxy witnessed that humans could protect, that compassion could triumph over fear, that cooperation could outlast conflict. Calder stood with Relk at his side, Sivrin and Torek nearby, Mela observing the horizon, and Nixon nuzzling his hand. He realized they had formed something rare and powerful, a pack beyond species. They were connected not by blood, not by origin, but by trust, respect, and shared purpose. The ice moon, once silent and empty, now held life, understanding, and unity. Calder's human choices had allowed the Krynith to survive, and in return, they had given him something he thought lost forever, belonging. As night fell and the auroras lit the sky in sweeping colors, Calder looked at the wolves and felt the future. They would explore the ice, learn more about the galaxy, and share knowledge. He would remain with them, a guide, a friend, and a witness. Together they were more than human and alien. They were a family. And for the first time in decades, Calder felt hope, not just for himself, not just for the Krynith, but for the possibility that understanding, courage, and compassion could change the universe. The ice moon was no longer lonely. It was alive. And under human steel, the Krynith and Calder had found something the galaxy rarely offered: trust beyond fear, connection beyond species, and a future built on unity.